Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday night's Narrative Live. It's good to be with you here with Eric Garland. How are you, Eric?
I'm in a forward lock position. Let's go.
It is one of those nights. I got to say, there's an expression in television I was telling you before we got on the air called crashing a show, which is when you put a show together in the last 5 minutes of your time before the show because something's changed dramatically. That's what's happened to us tonight. We've had to crash the show. So anything could happen, but it will be fun. Let's talk a little bit about why we crashed the show tonight. It's because we were planning to do a very special show. We were going to do something out of the ordinary for us. We're going to talk to someone who was involved in the January the 6th insurrection, the coup attempt, call it what you will, and someone who had inside knowledge about what was going on that day. And that person was Joe Flynn, who is Mike Flynn's brother. And yes, it's kind of shocking to think that we'd put him on the air, but we think he has answers to questions that we have for that day. But just in the last few hours, we've come across another story from Mother Jones, which really puts the whole Flynn operation in a completely different light. It really presents them as a menace to society, and someone who's, at least according to this article and this audio tape, which we'll play you, indicates that a member of Flynn's personal security detail on January the 5th and the 6th was actually threatening one of the witnesses for the January 6th commission as early as or as late as last month. So this woman has been working with the commission and who knows who else, providing information about what happened on that day. She used to work with Flynn, and they are threatening her on this tape in a very overt way. I'm going to play you the tape in a bit, but it's pretty stunning. And under those circumstances, we absolutely cannot put Joe Flynn on the air, certainly not before we allow the person involved in this matter, Stacey Burke, to have her say about what happened, because we really need to understand how we got in a situation where a former general, his associates from his personal security detail, are threatening a witness to these January the 6th commission, which is really the story we're talking about here tonight. It's quite stunning.
And not just a retired general, but the brother of the head of the Pacific Command, who's also a lieutenant general. So
also implicated in the January the 6th investigation in many ways, which we'll talk about tonight as well.
Yeah.
So, this has not been the finest hour for the Flynn brothers or family, for sure. This is the last few years has been not their best showing, but, this might be the low points that they've had over the last couple of years. This is really something else to think that they, I'm not saying that they did this. We don't know that they did this, but one of their members of their personal security detail, someone who's part of the First Amendment Praetorians, we've covered them a lot on the show. That person, one of the founders of the 1AP, he is the person who's caught on this tape saying very, very threatening things, in my opinion, to Stacey Burke. Eric, this is a tough day for democracy, that's for sure, but it's also a tough day for the Flynns. I mean, it seems to me, in some hot water over this. This is not just something you can brush off. I mean, if this is, in fact, it bears out to be something that they're involved in.
Well, there's not much those boys do that looks too good. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not trying to just be cutesy. It's hard to Mike Flynn was at the inauguration on the dais in 2017, immediately texting about giving next generation American nuclear technology to the bone saw mafia, the Saudis. Mm-hmm. And he was already on the payroll of, Turkey, NSO
Turkey,
group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Russia, I mean, he got to get like $45,000 for going to meet Vladimir Putin and making a speech that one time. I mean, these guys have colorful clients, to say the least. It's not like they're choosing from the best democracies and fine examples of the Western world.
A reminder that heads of intelligence agencies have to register like every conversation with a foreign national over like 30 seconds with their security officers after they retire. They're not allowed to be on the payroll of other governments. So anyways, we've been on Flynn a long time there. And now more Flynns keep popping out, and none of them are very nice. So
look, this is a very important character in this whole story, because let's be honest here. He had dinner with Vladimir Putin. I don't know too many people who had dinner with Vladimir Putin. And even if it was a 5-minute dinner or whatever it was, he flew to Moscow for $45,000 to have dinner with Vladimir Putin, main propaganda network of the Russian state. I mean, that's not a look that anyone would say is a good look, but, in his case, particularly bad, considering what had landed up happening to him when he became the national security advisor for Donald Trump. Yeah, potentially, not potentially, lying to the FBI and admitting to lying to the FBI for not revealing his conversations with the Russian ambassador. So another Russian angle right there, so it's unfathomable that these people are still walking around.
The question of why are these guys allowed to walk around is present on one's mind.
Yeah. let's take a look at what we have tonight, because we are going to talk a lot about Michael Flynn, and we're also going to talk about Chris Miller as we continue to talk about our command and control investigation. This is our investigation, which basically is asking the question on everyone's mind, which is Donald Trump and his inner circle really in command and control of the January the 6th insurrection and attempted coup? And we've come at this in a million different ways, and each way we come at it, it just looks to me like, yes, Donald Trump was very much in command and control, and certainly Mike Flynn and Roger Stone and Alex Jones and Sidney Powell and all, and maybe even Ginny Thomas, as we've been discovering, were all somehow involved.
And some people sitting at the Pentagon.
Yeah. So we're going to get into that tonight. We're going to figure out, what was that delay? Why was there such a delay for the National Guard to be sent in by the Pentagon? This was a decision made by the Pentagon to wait for an extraordinary amount of time. And why was that happening? So let's begin by listening to some of this tape. Here's the story from Mother Jones. This is the headline here: far-right paramilitary member warned a 1-6 committee witness against speaking out. And you listen to it, it's one thing, but when you actually read the transcript, it's a completely other thing. I'm going to just quickly pull up this tape, which just came out of our transcript machine. We have a machine that pulls out transcripts. I'm not going to tell you for sure that these are accurate transcriptions, but at least it'll give you a sense of what was said.
I've listened to the tape, and I don't want to prejudice the audience, but it's basically like, hey, you're talking about our totally legal and totally cool Jan 6 insurrection thing, and you keep recording stuff, and it'd be a shame if you died.
Yeah.
And the target is saying, "Whoa, geez, what do you mean by that?" He was recording it again. So it's like, the operational security on these guys is not great. If you're calling somebody to threaten them because they're recording things, I mean, don't you think they'd record that to share with them? Because there's a whole lot of these people have lost their damn coconuts is what's happened. It's you can't just roll around and threaten to kill everybody that you disagree with.
No, you can't.
There's a whole lot of these octogenarians, these guys that can't do 50 sit-ups, who they wanted a revolution where they could die gloriously, or only the other guys would die. It's not clear what they wanted, but they're just very quick to talk about violence and doing violence to other citizens and whatnot. I actually know some people who do combat, who hurt feelings for a living, and they're not so quick to talk about violence because they've seen it.
Yeah,
they know how to do it. They treat it with respect.
The implication from this tape, it really is. I mean, I try to figure out, are they meaning something else? Are they trying to say something else to her? It's pretty obvious what they're talking to her about. I mean, they're talking to her about her dying if she continues to cooperate, continues to talk out, continues to be public about what happened on January the 6th. Now, this also dovetails. Remember, we've had the former senatorial candidate, and his name will come to me in a second, on a show here from Pennsylvania. He also felt like the Flynn family was involved in targeting officials in those states to make them comply with their requests to do an audit of their elections. So that's another factor right there that, it's a second time we've seen or heard of the people associated with the Flynns, let's say, being threatening or bullying, or in this case, giving a death threat. So this is a very long piece of tape. I'm going to cut it into little bits if I can, but let's listen to, on the one side is Michael Kenny. He's a First Amendment Praetorian member. If I'm not mistaken, he's one of the founding members. And then Stacey Burke is the woman who is the witness. And this is the conversation they had.
Oh, there you go. Life is good.
Life was really good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Staying busy,
Were you doing that trucker
I'm going to have to hear that
convoy
again. Sorry about that.
No, you know why? That party's over. I just don't understand what these guys are whining about.
This is the trucker convoy where they drove around the Beltway like everybody else in protest.
You didn't get one by now. You ain't getting one, so it don't make a bit of sense to me.
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing, but Flynn and the America Project were funding it. So.
I got no idea.
Yeah, they were offering gift cards, and it was public. It was on their website. They weren't hiding it or being all secretive or anything. They were very public about it.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I don't really have time these days to sit around and look at all that kind of happy shit,
Well, I figured you're out on the road and stuff. You had more time to.
When
I don't know. I guess you're not.
Keep an eye on what I'm doing.
That's what I was going to say. I guess you're not exactly looking at stuff like that while you're driving.
Yeah. I could see, if these guys were protesting the open border, that kind of stuff, I can see their gripe. I can understand it. But I think at this point, they're showing up, for the party, and the party's already over.
That's kind of true. I was thinking that too. I mean, it was like, if you were going to protest mandates, wouldn't that have been a year and a half ago?
That would have been about the right time, I figure.
I mean, that's the only protest I've ever attended in my entire life, literally, ever at all, was right after COVID, and it was on the shutdown, and it was literally 2 weeks in, because I was like, this is not going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
They misspoke. They didn't bullshit us. They just misspoke. They meant 2.5 years.
No, that's...
When others called it.
2.5 years will flatten the curve, and 6 months after that, right before the State of the Union line, we'll go ahead and magically make it disappear.
Well, as soon as I saw, I called my friends, I did that protest because I called my friends who worked at the hospitals, and literally they were sitting around. There was nobody coming in to the hospital. Literally, they were sitting around with boatloads of food that people brought for them because they thought they were so overworked, and you know what I mean, whatever. So people were bringing cookies and pizzas and food trays, and you know what I mean. And they're sitting there
like that. You're making me hungry.
And they were sitting there with no patience and all this food that people were bringing. And I was going, something's seriously wrong with this picture.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so I went to my first ever rally, because that's when they were making tents in the parking lots of hospitals, acting like there was going to be some, they were going to be triaging people in parking lots of the hospitals. And then I called my friends who were doctors and nurses, and they're just like, yeah, we're sitting around the ER with, it's dead. Nobody's even coming in for a stroke or a heart attack.
Yeah, there's plenty of that going on now that, everybody's got vaxxed.
Well, what happened, and this was part of why I did the protest, what happened, and I could see this happening then, people were dying of strokes and heart attacks. They were going from home to the morgue because nobody wanted to go to the hospital and get COVID. And that's part of why I did the protest, because it was like, you guys are killing people, because you're making everybody think.
Well, the Backshot's killing people too. Do you know that the death rate of people between the age of 18 and 34 increased 40% in the last year?
Oh, really? Yeah, because the heart problems that the vax is causing for the young men?
Yeah, heart problems, other organ failure, all kinds of whatever. But it's all, you can bet your ass that's all because of that bullshit vax that they had made back in 2014, that 9 months, They already had that shit. They didn't come up with that in 9 months or whatever it was there. They already had that. It was sitting there on the shelf waiting,
Yeah,
all they had to do was spin up the manufacturing. It was already there. It was. If anybody thinks otherwise, well, go on ahead. Fool yourself.
Well, then Trump would have been in on it.
I don't know who's in on it. I I'm just telling you.
I'm just
no
saying.
damn way in the world that they spun that up that fast. That's all bullshit.
I'm saying though,
They've been researching that shit since 2014.
but I'm saying like Trump took credit for all that. So if that was true, then he was.
Well, I guess it depends if you knew it or not.
Yeah.
It really gets to the point some way soon. You'll hear the real threats coming
All
out.
their little patents and shit filed a long time ago.
Long, uncomfortable silence.
Anyways, that's that.
Yeah.
Just making steak, by the way. That's the sound you're hearing in the
About
background.
that January 6th guy that committed suicide the other day.
No, what happened?
Well, I guess he got caught up with the crowd, you know. Got ushered inside the Capitol building, you know, by the Capitol Police who were right there at the doors, ushering everybody in. And, you know, he walked around like everybody else did and then left the building. Didn't do any damage, didn't, you know, do anything other than go inside the building where he should have been. You know, of course, at that point, there was nothing going, there was no session going on because they were already hiding with AOC in the lavatory of another building, scared to death, thinking somebody was going to kill them, you know, ordering lunch.
Well, I did a whole lot.
Shook up, you know.
I did a whole lot of hiding around, thinking somebody was going to kill me.
Well, just order lunch. That seems to be the remedy for that. Ask Nancy, she'll tell you.
Well,
That's
no,
what they
I'm
did.
saying.
They went down to wherever and then ordered lunch.
I'm saying.
We're scared to death. These people are going to kill us. They're right outside the door. Somebody call Domino's.
I wasn't calling Domino's.
Such bullshit. The whole thing was bullshit.
No, but you remember how scared I was the whole time.
Yeah. I would say you were concerned at the very least. I don't know how scared you were.
What?
Yeah, you were concerned for sure.
Oh my God, I was terrified.
You sure didn't look it.
Really?
Yes. You were cool as a cucumber.
You're probably like if I was disassociated. I was terrified, Mike. Like, how can you not think that? Especially with everybody saying I was going to be killed.
Say that again?
Especially with everybody constantly saying I was going to be killed.
You just never know.
Well,
It ain't over till it's over, right?
Wow.
no, but I'm saying back, well, yeah, I'm saying back then.
Well, I'm saying now and in the future. You know, it ain't necessarily over. Shit happens.
You think I'm still going to get killed?
Well, I don't know.
Don't you think that if I was going to get killed, I would have been killed by now?
Sometimes it's inconvenient. You know, it just depends on what you do, you know, and what you don't do.
What do you mean?
Well, if they think you're a threat, or if they don't, might be the difference. Right now, everybody knows ain't nothing going to happen. Because I knew that way back then.
You were telling me I could get killed back then.
Because you always record what everybody says and you put shit out there and you follow people around and take pictures.
I wasn't doing that back then.
You talk a lot publicly, and that's what makes you a target.
I talk a lot publicly, but I wasn't recording anybody until after the election. So that didn't make sense. I wasn't recording until all that stuff started.
Well, I'm just saying, you know what you did. You know what you didn't do. You just got to put yourself in the other guy's shoes.
But which guy?
Yeah, exactly.
No, seriously, like which guy?
Seriously, that's what I'm saying. Which one? Because you know there was a number of people you ruffled their feathers. If you put anybody in jeopardy of prison time or, might hurt them financially or whatever, people get itchy, people don't think clearly. You just think about the easy way.
So do you think that that Coke, like that it was why would you think Wilson or Coke were a part of that?
What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I guess, I don't understand how Wilson would go to jail, Wilson or Coke, unless they had actually participated in the election fraud.
Well, you would think that anybody that did anything with election fraud would go to jail. But they're not. Nobody is. Have you noticed? One or two people that did, they were, what do you call, useful idiots that got jammed up. But nobody of any consequence, and everybody knows what happened.
Who was the useful? There were 600 people that went to jail with January 6th.
On January 6th, ain't got nothing to do with it. I'm talking about them people. I'm talking about the election fraud.
Oh, yeah. Well, aren't they all wasn't it all tied together?
It was. It was the most coordinated effort I ever saw.
Oh, really?
So, but who was the real?
But none of them people are in jail, right? So why would Coke or anybody else go to jail? Nobody's going to jail.
Well, that's what Coke.
Nothing's going to happen. It's too late. Yeah.
That's what Wilson said. Nobody's going to jail over any of this. In fact, he was threatening that I would go to jail. He knew all the law enforcement in the whole state, and he could trump up false charges on me. Oh. Which one thing is weird, I found out that he actually has a history of doing that. He actually did that to someone. It ended up getting exposed he put a buddy police officer up to getting somebody arrested on false charges that was a enemy of his. And then he shot another guy during an officer-involved shooting, which he told me a totally different story about the shooting than what I recently read, which was kind of interesting. He made it sound like he sniper shot the guy who had showed up for workplace violence towards his ex-wife, and he was protecting all the people at the workplace. And then when you read the actual story of what happened, he had allegedly had a patrol car driving around the guy's street for a week in advance, didn't like him because he was supposedly some sovereign citizen group, and then he showed up on a call where the guy's ex-wife or wife had called about paperwork. It wasn't even a domestic violence call. He was taking paperwork that he wasn't supposed to from the business, and he showed up and they had a power struggle type scuffle, and then he shot and killed him. But he had already been stalking the guy, which was kind of bizarre.
imagine if that guy has some friends that didn't sit well with it.
If what guy had some friends?
The guy that got killed, maybe he has family members or friends, and somebody that don't give a rat's ass and don't like how that turned out.
Right.
Imagine what could happen to him.
Yeah. I mean, but that was a while, like nothing happened to him.
Yeah, my point. That's my point. Nothing happened to him. But what if somebody that guy was pals with, or a family member, or some associate decided, I don't like the way that turned out. I think I'll handle it myself.
Right.
It can be painful.
That could be what?
It can be painful.
I guess I'm not understanding. Yes, that would be horrible.
Well, what I'm saying, it's kind of an analogy. The same thing applies to you as it does to that guy.
What?
Never mind. Forget it. It's over your head.
It's apparently it is over my
Never
head.
mind. Just let it go by. I don't mean nothing.
Oh, like I ticked somebody off so his friends come after
If you
him?
piss somebody off enough, just give it some thought. Let your imagination run away with yourself. I'm sure you can figure it out. You're not stupid. You don't need me to fill in the gaps for you. You know exactly what I'm telling you.
But so in other words, he gets his friends to come after me? Or his friends just automatically come after me?
Never mind. Forget about it. You know what? It's just this is a conversation I'm not going to have.
I genuinely was, I guess, not understanding.
Seriously, you're not stupid, so I don't like playing that kind of game. I gotta go. I'll talk to you after, okay?
Okay.
Boy, does he have to go, because that's an interesting conversation. I mean, that was like 20 minutes of interrogation, I would say, more than a conversation.
Well, it might have started out as a conversation,
Yeah.
but of course, my background, as we've discussed before, is a human intelligence collection, and I got a T-shirt that says "Human." We just ask the guy.
Yeah.
And there's certain techniques that professionals use in conversations, and called elicitation, on how to get somebody to say something that they might not otherwise say. The pros are so good at it, it's so pleasant, you won't even remember it's happened. And these things are subtle and take years and all that. However, there's another group of people that end up doing kind of a version of this. Like, let's say you were involved in something that was kind of criminal and you have some criminal exposure and you agree to cooperate with the government, for example. Mm-hmm. I've heard certain conversations where there are people who get sort of a very quick and dirty set of lessons on, how to try to get somebody to say something when there's a device recording.
Right.
To my ear, that sounded what is sometimes referred to as DialACrook. Once you're cooperating with a government entity, you might get some immunity around something you might done or might not have done, or maybe you're just being, helpful. And you have a conversation, you kind of want to get as much specific language on a recording as possible, certain keywords. To my ear, she was trying to draw. What do you mean? Well, who was that? Well, was Trump in on that?
Yeah.
And it kind of sounds like he's not nearly as sharp as he thinks he is, this Praetorian.
Yeah, this is a First Amendment Praetorian. And then that's him in the front of this picture here, this with a tan cap. And, he's there protecting Mike Flynn. And behind Mike Flynn, you can actually see Joe Flynn. And they are, that's personal security detail on January the 6th or maybe the 5th. Maybe it was another event leading up to that. But, that was one of his big jobs, was hanging around with Mr. Flynn, in addition to being a founding member of the First Amendment Praetorians, which were a version of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, but much more sophisticated in their operation. They're more the Marine types or special operation forces types
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean? Because look, again, if you know people that actually have done this in the armed forces, these things are very specific. Like there's nothing Marine-like.
No, special operations forces.
Not.
I would say special operations forces is what they claim to be from. They claim to get their membership from those, and they were assigned to do more specific things like protect people like Mike Flynn on a regular basis. And some of them were also the Oath Keepers, but some of them were not. The Oath Keepers was sort of a mishmash of every, anyone who is a former military person or current military person. But the 1AP was more of an intelligence operation that was being run and a protection operation, also protection racket probably, as it sounds like.
If that, hold on, Zeb, hold on. If that dude on that call was intel, no. If he's in the service, he was doing laundry. He was in the motor pool. That's not an intel guy. He would have gone, goodbye, click. Like,
because it's pretty obvious by the
sorry,
end.
I got a flat. I got to go.
Yeah.
Because you're very clearly trying to get him. Well, geez, I don't know. Who do you think stole the money from the bank, Mike or Jerry? I mean, I can't remember. Does Mike ever talk about things like that? I mean, like you hear some of that junior elicitation stuff. Yeah. And you're like, I'm sorry, I'm getting a text from my dog at the vet. It's an emergency. Bye, click. And because you go, okay, she's fishing.
Yeah,
that's a real intel person would have ended that conversation much
100%. I mean, clearly she's fishing, but he figures it out, but way too late. I mean, after he delivers the threat, I think twice or three times. It's like specifically saying it. Imagine that were you. That kind of language is incredibly specific. I mean,
felonious. Yeah, delivering a threat of violence over interstate communications is a felony under Title 18 in the United States. It's that we just witnessed a crime right on the show. That's a crime.
And the First Amendment Praetorians are a very serious group. I mean, I remember we did a show on them a few months ago, and we titled it The Next Big Threat, because if anyone was going to start some naughty stuff in terms of violence related to any sort of uprising or anything like that on the right, it would be these guys. I mean, there are lots of Afghanistan veterans, some of which are a little bit, tainted by the war. I don't know in what way specifically, but they certainly look like they've been damaged by the war in much the same way that I think you could say Mike Flynn was. I mean, clearly the Afghanistan war had a huge impact on him. And he was, of course, the head of intelligence in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's definitely veterans that have been co-opted, and 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, was a heavy burden on a whole lot of people. There's a whole lot of PTSD. There's the opportunity to be radicalized because of what a rough experience it was. Yeah. I certainly don't want to make light of any of that. I know people that have been through that. I know people that have been recovering from PTSD from that service, and that's estimable. Also, not an excuse to go around threatening insurrections and threatening to murder citizens.
Yeah. I should also mention a little bit more about Stacey Burke. She was one of the people that Sidney Powell had used to write one of her affidavits. Remember that Sidney Powell was going around asking people for affidavits to declare the elections fraudulent in different parts of the country. Okay. So she was one of the people who had signed up for that. That's how she knew she got into the circle of people around Flynn and Sidney Powell and company, and how she got an understanding of what was going on in there. Obviously, at some point, she decided this is too much for me, and she was placed under the protection of the First Amendment Praetorians, which meant basically they were keeping her hostage. I don't know if it was protection or what it was, but they wouldn't,
That's not protection, that's kidnapping.
Yeah. They would let her move, but they would move with her, which is unusual. And they claimed that she was under threat of some sort of life threat. It turns out that tape we played last week with Justin Sullivan, or 2 weeks ago, remember the Roger Stone associate? And he's talking about the plan to kill people and
to shoot me in the rear end.
Yeah. I remember the curfew. Well, she's actually the person, I believe, recording that tape with a First Amendment Praetorian guy next to her. And that's the voices you hear on the other side of the tape. So, so that we kind of know is going to be a very important piece of investigation for the DOJ. I mean, they found this evidence interesting. So they found that previous evidence interesting. They're probably going to find this interesting.
I would think.
Yeah, you'd think so. I mean, which is why, sort of like you get to the point where it's like, oh, Mike Flynn's in trouble. There's also the other day you pointed out.
After a while.
Yeah. So it has taken a while. But the Oath Keepers story that came out the other day, they dropped these Stuart Rhodes, which is the head of the Oath Keepers, that these text messages that the Oath Keepers had sent out. This was in relation to their seditious conspiracy investigation. I mean, they're actually investigating a seditious conspiracy here, and they're releasing these selected texts. And in many of them, there are mentions of Mike Flynn and not really mentions of anybody else, which I found really striking. You pointed this out the other day, but it is unusual that Mike Flynn is the name that appears sort of unredacted when others are redacted.
Yeah, that's interesting. The prosecutors weren't that worried about people figuring out who it was.
Yeah, in there they talk about how they're going to be protecting Mike Flynn for that day on the 5th and the 6th, and how he was part of the leadership. It's a couple of interesting pages. I actually can't read them myself at this point because the screen I'm looking at is too small.
I can do a dramatic reading. Do you want this like Royal Shakespeare Company or just straight?
I'll take whatever Rhode Island accent you can come up with.
I was kind of hoping that Joe Flynn was going to be on there. So, all right, fine. Okay, guys, I'll attempt to set up a call with everyone tonight. In my opinion, sir, let's keep this leadership only, we need 5 to 10 on a call, not 50. Everyone's going to get over that real quick. Yeah. Just that I can have a team there for the 5th, but if it's back up to the backup security detail, they aren't too excited. Tell me we go Flynn and we are moving him. You'll have the baddest ass crew you've ever seen. There's a bug difference in detail, though. What is exactly big? Told Flynn has a team already. The baddest ass security you've ever seen.
Well, this is the thing, is this team that they're talking about actually Michael Kenny over here? Is that the team that he has in place already? Because he was with Michael Flynn a lot. So is that?
I wouldn't bet on those guys that were surrounding Flynn. I would bet against them in a paintball match.
Well,
have you? Okay, so
and or insurrection.
Everyone is.
Yeah, it hurts. It hurts just thinking about this stuff because how did they think that anything was going to happen here that would even begin to look like an overthrowing of the election results? And it was just impossible to believe that that's what's going on.
Can I riff a little on what actual special operations military guys are like? The lean, mean, they deliver trash at night. Yes. Special delivery. You're talking about, and there's a lot of resources put into them, and these are guys that can go 6 days without sleep and do vector calculus when they get there, and shoot someone at 100 yards. They do not look like they would get winded after, frisbee golf.
Yeah.
And there's just all these paunchy dudes that it's like they watched Top Gun like the rest of us did in '87 and just looked awesome. And, they saw the volleyball scene and everyone's cut and they're shooting things and they're just, they're just the best of the best. And then those days passed by and we didn't finish the Cold War that way or whatever. And this was their big moment and they were going to get to shoot some people maybe, and then they would win and it would be like a big victory at the end. And instead it's a bunch of fat old men who want to just shoot people and have a fantasy, and they were being manipulated by foreign powers and our local oligarchs who don't want to pay taxes. And that's basically all this shit is about. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to pay taxes, so they didn't want democracy anymore. And there's all this pseudo-military fantasy around this when it's like, look, guys, the only reason January 6th was not just a splash of pink spray is they did not call out the Marines from 8th and I. There wasn't a single Apache AH-86 helicopter that came over the ridge and convinced you all to go home in the most definitive way. That could have taken 14 seconds. And just this whole fantasy has been proliferated throughout the Facebooks, the Reddits, the Donald, the Jabbers, the Gits, the Getters, all these digital things where they've targeted these people. They know these data brokers out there. They know how old these guys are. They know who's divorced, who has had declared bankruptcy. They have psychologically profiled these people, and a lot of them are vulnerable. And they're given a sense of meaning here of they're going to go out in a blaze of glory. Yep. And instead they're going out in a blaze of felony and a blaze of treason. And the people doing the manipulating, I want them hung high.
Well, those are the people also making a lot of money. I mean, let's face it, Michael Flynn and his family have made a lot of money of all this stuff, whether it's their fundraising or their legal defense funds or their road shows that they've done, or, this other thing, they've got these digital soldiers trademarked. It's a name that they've trademarked. And every time someone uses that, they make a piece of money out of it. There's just a lot of money being made by people, but it's not the people on the ground who are out there, doing the actual insurrection. It's these other people that are getting all the money, and who knows where that's flowing to.
Well, you get these guys, they get targeted because they're vulnerable in different ways. Maybe their career flamed out. They were head of an intelligence agency and they got fired because they were kind of nuts at work a lot or whatever. And then you give them a cottage industry. And look, I've seen Mike Flynn's FARA filings. He got cut, checks for 400 grand here, 75 grand there. That's not who's making money off this. It's coal companies, petroleum companies that were going to keep going, family offices and their finances that, wanted to keep their offshore bank accounts.
A lot of companies with operations in China. In fact, a lot of them is one of the things that I took away when I did the analysis was, how come all these big companies that are supporting all of this have these big operations in China, could make a lot of money off that too. I know. I just want to mention just briefly, people might not know the Michael Flynn story. Here's a very brief Michael Flynn story for you. So in 2012, Obama appointed Flynn the director of national intelligence. In 2013, he attends a gala hosted by Bijan QAN. He becomes a closer to Russian contacts. That's in 2013. Who is Bijan QAN, Eric?
Turkish Armenian or the Turkish Iranian. That was his partner in the foreign agency case at the Eastern District of Virginia.
Yes, correct. So
we have the weirdest bar of trivia here on Narrative.
So then in 2014, Obama fires Flynn after reports that he was acting suspiciously, whatever that may mean, and making racist comments at work. Same year, Flynn sets up this intel group with QAN. And then by 2015-16, he becomes a key figure in the Trump campaign. And then in 2017 becomes the national security advisor, who was then fired by Trump like 2 weeks afterwards, or he had to resign, whatever the story was, because he was considered a threat to national security. And so he went away because then there was a lawsuit against him, a real actual criminal suit for lying to the FBI, which he pled guilty to. And then somehow miraculously got a new lawyer in Sidney Powell, and miraculously, because of Bill Barr, had the entire case dropped. He then took back his guilty plea, and soon later was given a pardon by Donald Trump. And the very next day, after getting a pardon from Donald Trump, he was out there selling the story of an insurrection. So it, cause effect, maybe, could be.
Can I go back 2 more years in Flynn's history, though?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's to a paper from Center for New American Security. It's called Fixing Intel, a Blueprint for Making Intelligence Relevant in Afghanistan. And the authors were then Major General Michael T. Flynn, Cap Matt Pottinger, U.S. Marine Corps, and Paul D. Batchelor, Defense Intelligence Agency. And I just want to read a couple paragraphs. This is actual intelligence and actual military stuff. And this was Mike Flynn 12 years ago. And I remember when this paper came out, and it had some effect on folks. Among the initiatives Major General Flynn directs, select teams of analysts will be empowered to move between field elements, much like journalists, to visit collectors of information at the grassroots level and carry that information back with them to the regional command level. These items will integrate information collected by civil affairs officers, PRTs, atmospherics teams, Afghan liaison officers, female engagement teams, willing non-governmental organizations and developmental organizations, PSYOPs teams, humanitarian teams, infantry battalions, to name a few. Some of what he had, I could read the whole thing. That's the nuts and bolts of thinking about reconnaissance and intelligence in an operational context of a battle space. That's the real stuff.
Yeah.
And, he was part of that. I just want to draw the bright line between that and the paintball pants. Mm-hmm. There's, I do intel. So I call people up and I tell them, hey, it'd be a shame if you fell over and, hurt your head, because I know a guy who killed a guy and maybe that would happen to you. That's not intelligence. Intelligence.
No, that guy might not be.
A much more sophisticated discipline. And Flynn started intelligence in 1982. He was like climbing it was in the Grenada conflict, I believe, with like a backpack full of electronic equipment on, if I remember his story correctly, climbing a cliff to point signals intelligence equipment at Cuba from Grenada, if I have that story correct. Wow. And, he was sort of went up the chain from there. And, I want to know what happened between that,
Yeah, I don't know
what happened between that and 2021.
One thing that happened is he started musing around this idea of let's start a intelligence op that could, get sort of the entire population. I don't remember the exact terms here, but clearly in 2017 and then again in 2019, he and his team, now many of them left Afghanistan, were working on something to, mass produce some sort of psyop, I guess, against the American people. And many people say, I mean, I'm not one to say that directly because I don't think we know that, but that here's the actual quote from The Intercept. As far as back as the fall of 2017, Flynn and his surrogates began probing the possibility of deploying a viral online information operation that would tap into the minds of millions of social media users. And there they did a graph of the digital soldiers trademarked with the name and how it appears on social media and how it interconnects on social media. And in fact, there are many people involved in the QAnon conspiracy that come out of the Flynn world. In fact, he's well known, even though they're disputing this. The family's actually suing CNN for this. But right there in the picture on the left, they're taking the QAnon oath. The video's out there. Some people can still see it. But absolutely, they were taking the oath for QAnon, which is kind of crazy. This is a former U.S. general. It's
a current U.S. general.
Yeah, and a current. Well,
you mean on the T-shirt, not on the right?
Yeah. I don't know if I don't think that's Charles there. I did at one point think it was Charles, but it's not. But they're clearly in favor of QAnon or supporting QAnon, even though they later just said it was junk. They did this digital soldiers thing. I think a much more sophisticated effort, which was probably quite successful in gaslighting America during the 2016 election and beyond. And, it includes people, you'll be very familiar with some of these people because we've all had to experience them in the Cassandra Fairbanks on the one side. There's Jim Hoft. And then these are a dinner that they had at the Phyllis. I can never remember.
Yeah, that's outside of St. Louis.
Yeah.
I remember where that dinner was. Yeah.
Her Eagles thing, which Joe over there, Joe Flynn, has a big role in. You'll also see Mike Cernovich over there. And on the page before that was Mrs. and Jack Prozobiak. So, these people are professional gaslighters. They're professional conspiracy operators.
So in the paragraph that I read from the actual paper on security and evolving intelligence, there was a reference to psychological operations. That's a thing on all sides. That's controlling narrative, controlling morale. The Russians do it. The Chinese do it. We do it. The French do it. It is a part of modern warfare.
Yeah.
And getting somebody to give up before they show up is a concept that's, Sun Tzu talks about in The Art of War. So there's always going to be subterfuge and trying to scare a population so it's not as resistant. That's 3,000-year-old warfare. What I find so compelling about these two things, and you go, well, these guys are gaslighters. Mike Flynn took an oath to this country, and he served in these roles. We're far from home. And like what's going on in Ukraine right now is Ukraine's reforging its identity. And no doubt some Western governments are trying to help shape the iconography, the imagery, so that, Ukraine has a stronger national identity. That's us meddling, by the way. That's in our net. This is realpolitik.
Yeah,
this
we
is
do that.
Us in our national interest. France in its internet, in its interest, and Russia doing the other thing in the other direction. That's just how the big boys play the game. And the people who are in psychological operations at the Pentagon, who have access to classified, information and techniques and how people are trained and all that, they take this oath, and that is supposed to be just used for, national interest. And you don't just go running off with your buddies and decide you're going to take what you learned when you were trained by the U.S. government and the Department of Defense at our taxpayers' expense. And when we assumed that you would be chill because you took this oath, and especially if you're promoted up the ranks, we don't expect that you're going to run out and do that on someone else's behalf. And, there's nothing wrong with PSYOPs in the sense that is modern warfare.
It's a reality. It's a reality. This is how the game is played, as you pointed out.
It can be done positively. I think there's plenty of PSYOPs going on in Ukraine from the NATO side. Mm-hmm. And I think because look, Ukraine is a country that was, 3/4 owned by mobsters, to be generous, and very, very corrupt elements, and a people that would like to be free. But that's, a very American point of view, that these people deserve democracy. And I'm trying to remember one of the guests we had recently who's like, they already said they wanted this in the Revolution to Dignity. So there's people that are, in the American sense, yearning to breathe free. We can use a version of psychological operations and support to help them solidify that belief in themselves and pulling together a nation, which is something that in a lot of cases had to be done sort of inorganically. The notion of Italy as a single country is very new, right? You had to create an Italian identity. Same in Spain. You can use these techniques to build up democracy, to build up countries and people, or you can use them to tear people apart, to get them to tear each other apart. And what's happened is you have people, and it's very disturbing, the people that took these oaths and learn these techniques and were entrusted with much, who are like, yeah, let's get Americans to rip each other's throats out.
Yeah, absolutely. This is basically, it looks to me, there's no definitive answer to this, that, was Mike Flynn the guy who did QAnon? We don't really know that for sure, but he has a lot of associates from his intelligence groups that were involved in QAnon. And we know that he was interested in that whole world in 2017. And we know that he launched this digital soldiers thing in 2016. It certainly feels like there's indications that that's one of the things he was doing. And that, speaking of his skill level, that would be something more of his skill level than this operation to threaten the witness from January 6th, which looked a little lame. But, something like a QAnon would have been something that he could have concocted with his supporters, perhaps in other foreign countries, because he certainly was a foreign agent.
Well, the provenance of QAnon, it's hard telling. I think if you look at a lot of the themes there, it was attempting to reach a certain objective. It's crazy sounding, but very coherent. Mm-hmm. And again, if you have people that are looking for meaning and you give them meaning and identity and a purpose,
something to do,
and you make them feel like they are the center of the story. I mean, these guys on January 6th, when they're going in, it's like they're one of history's great actors. This is our moment, as opposed to we're running into an office building. Yeah. So people can't put letters in a box to signify what Wyoming voted this year.
Look, it was very significant what they did. I mean, if it had happened, if it succeeded, who knows what the Constitution would look like today? Who knows where, how much like Hungary would be looking like? Who knows? It's hard to tell. I mean, it's certainly telling that back in 2015 or whatever it was, there is Michael Flynn sitting next to Vladimir Putin, which he claims was only just for a few minutes. But boy, that was a photo op engineered by the Russians that was well worth the money. They paid $45,000 to get Flynn over there. And how important is it to get that shot for them to have their
very important.
Yeah.
To go, we got your
General Flynn.
Because when you've been the head of an intelligence agency, one of the reasons they keep such tight track of you is because your noggin, your head is an asset to our nation and to others, because stuff ain't nobody else supposed to know. And if you're playing footsie that close with the guys that bad, that's
all they needed was that photo. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the photo that Putin wanted. So even if it was just 5 minutes, it was 5 minutes to take that one photo that he needed to have, and then basically telegraph to America that he's got one of their men. And this is December 10th, 2015, just before the Trump campaign started getting going. Very telling indeed.
I mean, the Trump campaign was already rolling hard. And
right, but I think
I remember this period of time because I remember people going through my community going, "Did you hear? Who's on his campaign? Like who? Mike Flynn from DIA." It's like,
right.
What? Mike Flynn? What's he doing back? And I was like, "Oh no, not just that. He's been in Russia." So
don't forget that he was also the deputy head of the transition with Mike Pence. This guy was picking every single cabinet post and a whole bunch of other things. That's a very significant role to have. And, I don't know if Mike Pence was paying as much attention as he was. Well, that's the show. We better get off. Thanks for rolling with all the changes as we had it. And thanks to you at home for watching. You can always support Narrative at patreon.com/narrative. We really do appreciate your support. It's the only way we can afford to do these shows. And that's the show for tonight. We'll see you again on Friday night for the after show, and look forward to being with you then. Have a good night, everybody. Good night, Eric. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism. at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.